I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction in how we can get around Chicago and how that illustrates our ideas of position, displacement, and distance. You can look over these terms. Quantity is a measurable property of matter. Units are used to measure quantity. Each quantity can be measured using many units. Vectors are any quantity that must include a size or magnitude and a direction. And that direction can be given as positives or negatives, north, south, east, west, up, down. It doesn't really matter as long as everybody understands what direction you're talking about. Scalar quantities are any quantity that includes only size or magnitude. Position is location relative to an arbitrary origin. And again, arbitrary means that you can set your origin wherever you want it. And your origin then would be labeled 0, and that's your starting point. Displacement is a change in position. Displacement's a vector, and so it always requires magnitude and a direction, even if that direction is simply positive and negative. Displacement's partner is distance. Distance is a scalar quantity that measures how far. And as we talked about yesterday, your odometer in your car is always going to measure distance. So what we're talking about here is addresses. An address really is nothing more than a way of establishing a position. If you think about it, your house or apartment has a position in the town where you live, in the world actually. It includes both a number, a magnitude, and a direction. An example would be Maine East High School. Maine East's address is 2601 West Dempster. And so the magnitude is going to be 2601, and the direction is going to be west. So when you look at an address like that, what is it really measuring? Why do we even need it? So imagine we're living in a very small town with only one street and a couple houses. They need a unique position so they can get mail and other deliveries. To make life easy, we can just give them simple addresses of 1, 2, 3, or 4 Main Street. There would be no problems. The mail would get to the right house. But what happens if somebody wants to build a house in between house 2 and 3? It would be messy to have fraction addresses. So instead of numbering them 1, 2, 3, 4, let's spread them out a little bit. And so instead we will label them 100, 200, 300, 400. So we can easily put a house in between 200 and 300 and call it 250. So again, everything is good. But what happens if our town gets bigger and new streets and houses are added? So now instead of just having houses on one side, we've now moved them over to the other side. And so our dividing line there is Origin Avenue. Now, how are we going to deal with these new houses? Well, we can include number and direction. So houses that are on the right side of Origin Avenue or the east side, we could call 100 East, 200 East, 250 East, etc. And so those houses on the other side would be west. And so it would be 100 West, 200 West, 300 West. So what does the number in an address mean? What are the units on an address? What does an address of 200 East Main really mean? This address literally means that the position of this house is on Main Street 200 addresses east of the origin, which turns out to be Origin Avenue. In the real world, Main South's address is 1111 South D Road. Well, where is that? Well, that's going to be 1111 or 1111 addresses south of the origin on D Road. Well, where is the origin? Well, we can use Google Maps. And so when we Google Map 0 South D Road, it turns out that's Touhy Avenue. So the origin for Park Ridge is going to be Touhy Avenue. Well, if there's an 1111 South D Road, there's probably an 1111 North D Road. Well, let's see what's there. Again, if we just Google 1100 North D Road, we see that there is a house. So it's really important to use both magnitude and direction. Otherwise, these people would always get Main South's mail. So what about Chicago and the surrounding areas? Streets in Chicago have always tended to run north, south, or east and west. There's a few diagonal streets like Milwaukee Avenue out here, but many of those are old Indian trails. Milwaukee Avenue was an Indian trail up to Milwaukee. Because streets run north, south, or east or west, this sets up most streets as a grid pattern, like a graph. The first step is defining an origin for both direction, your 0 points. Early on, the Chicago River served as the origin for both north-south and east and west streets. Anything north of the river would have been north, everything south of the river would have been south. That tended to cause a problem though, because the river wasn't straight. In 1909, a new system was worked out using major streets as the origin. State Street is the origin for all streets running north and south. Madison Street is the origin for all streets running east and west. And that picture shows what State and Madison looked like in the early 1900s. And of course, here we have State and Madison today, a much, much different picture. The way actual addresses are determined actually dates back to the 1700s. And back when they were setting things up, they went through and set up what we call plats of townships in different areas. And that's where we get our townships today. Here are the practical aspects of this. 1 mile is divided into 8 city blocks. So a mile is divided into 8 city blocks. Each block contains 100 addresses. So there are literally 800 addresses in 1 mile. Those 3 facts are what allows us to always find our way around the city. It turns out that major streets in the city of Chicago tend to be located 1 mile apart. And that goes back to the early 1900s when they were rebuilding the city after the fire. So if major streets are 1 mile apart, that would be equal to 800 addresses or 8 blocks. Every major street, just like a house, has a position, address, and a name. For example, Dempster, right outside the school, is 8800 North. This means it's 8800 addresses north of the origin, which is going to be Madison Street, since Dempster runs east and west. It's 88 blocks or 11 miles, depending on what units you are looking for. Harlem is 7200 West. This means it's 7,200 addresses west of the origin. Because Harlem runs north and south, its origin is State Street. Since it's 7,200 addresses, that makes it 72 blocks or 9 miles from State Street. Here we have you can see the grid, the way it's laid out. For example, you've got Madison Street, and then Chicago Avenue is 800 North. North Avenue is 1600 North. Fullerton is 2400 North. Belmont is 3200 North. And if you do some math there, you'll see that each of those streets is 800 addresses apart from each other, which is 1 mile. That's also true for streets running in all the directions. Dempster's address is 8800 North, while Oakton Street is 8000 North, which means that if your address is 8400 North, then you must live halfway between Oakton and Dempster. And if you're familiar with that part of Niles, that means you live pretty close to Main Street. It turns out that Niles, Morton Grove, and Skokie use the Chicago system. Park Ridge, most of Des Plaines, Glenview, and Evanston don't. They use their own system for addresses. This leads to some very important inconsistencies. So if you just look down the street from Main East, even though Home Depot and Breedeman Toyota are right across the street from each other, they have totally different addresses. Home Depot, which is in Niles, is at 8650 West, while Breedeman, which has a Park Ridge address, is 1301 West. So if you were just looking at the addresses, you would think that those two places weren't anywhere near each other, even though we all know they're right across the street from each other. Okay, now for your assignment. You're going to read through the internet articles listed in the packet you're going to get, and then answer the associated questions. Those websites go through the history of how the Chicago street system or address system was actually set up and how it was very definitely needed back in the early 1900s. Once you get through reading those articles together and answering the questions, you're going to use the provided maps and information you've been given both on this video and on the websites you looked at to complete the packet in your groups. Work together on them. It's very important that you really understand this. This is probably one of the most practical things we're going to deal with this year. If you understand how to get around the city of Chicago, how the addresses are set up, it will make life a whole lot simpler for you. So this packet, if you don't get it done in class, please finish it for homework. We're going to go over it in class on Wednesday, and then we're going to have a pretty major quiz over it on Thursday. I will be back in the building after lunch, so if you have questions over it, please don't hesitate to email me, but we're definitely going to go over it on Wednesday. Please work together well. Most of the time you do a very good job with that, and make sure you understand how to get around the city of Chicago. Good luck.